we are going to use a data set, social media influencer marketing data set. And previously I had done a little of an inspection of the data set, and that's what formed the direction of my analysis. And this is what we are going to do. There are several features in this data set, and we are going to examine just a little of them. For example, we have authenticity, trustworthiness, quality of content, of influencer content. And I must add that some of these meanings I had to go online to check, and some of them are inferred, and then also based on the context of these data sets. And that's how we arrived at the meaning of these factors or these features. So I picked about 4 or 5 of them, and we are going to look at how, because for the consumers there are several groups, different groups according to their age, their income level, and the rest. So we want to see, and also the usage of social media platforms, several social media platforms. So we want to see if these strata now influences the perception of influencers, and then what are we using to measure the perception of influencers. So I mentioned earlier on, I picked authenticity, trustworthiness, and the quality of your content, and these are just the major things we are going to look at in this analysis. We're going to prepare our data, and as we do that, you're going to see those columns I mentioned, and you'll see how we got to select them for this analysis. So when we're here, we're going to inspect, across the demography, and then we are going to compare. We will calculate the average of each of these factors across different demographic groups, and we'll draw insights from there. We'll also do the same thing for social media platform and measure the same group of factors, and then we'll see if there are insights we can draw from there. We'll check if there are some correlations between these perception metrics, and lastly we are going to have some charts that would help solidify or visualize what we found in the process of this analysis. So first step is data preparation, and we're going to import some libraries that we'll need. So one of them is pandas. So quickly I'm going to import pandas. I think we're going to need matplotlib. Don't waste much time. So I have some of the basic libraries I'm going to use here. So the next thing is I'm going to load my data set. So you might ask, how are we going to load our data sets? So basically it's one of the things. You can just come here, already uploaded the data set, you just click on copy the parts, and then you use this method pd.read excel, that is, say pd.read excel. So you can just see what I did. I just pasted, check this. I just pasted the data sets I had copied earlier on. So after I do that, I can just run it. Here we run the cell from here. Oops. Okay, so I think I repeated some things there, so it has loaded, and this is a way you can do a basic inspection of the data set you just loaded. So I'll just add another code cell and the df.head, so you can see we have the several demographic groups according to gender, age group, income, education level. So like I said, I picked about 4 to 5 factors we want to see if these demographic groups has or influences the the consumer perception of the influencers. And I mentioned again the authenticity, trustworthiness, content quality, engagement, and the purchase intention. The Alright, so we'll just move from there. So we're going to check for missing values. We're going to check for missing values, and normally you would observe that we have so many columns. It's always good to narrow down what you want to do your analysis, because most times you won't be able to use all the columns. If not, you'll have many questions to answer and you might never really finish. So I want to just narrow down the columns that I'm going to use. So I'll just say columns to check. Okay, just say columns to check. Alright, so I'm coming. So this here is the authenticity, trustworthiness, and then the others, content quality, engagement. This GI engagement, I did a little bit of research on it, and sometimes I saw ranges from general influence, and the YIMP, the closest meaning I got is influencers marketing programs also for purchase. So the basically I inferred is a way of it's one of those metrics that tries to, or is tailored towards making the customers buy the service or products that the influencers are trying to market. So I just inferred it means young influencers marketing platform, or marketing for purchase or something. So now, I've singled out the columns I want to check. So one thing I can do is, okay, I said let me just check these columns I want to check now is there. So this is what I'm going to do. I want to check for missing values, because we always want to handle missing values. If not, they can mess up what we want to do, can hinder us in a way. So you can see that these are, some of them have missing values: gender 4 missing values, age group 12, and we discovered that the highest number of missing values we have is 12. It's not up to 20, it's not up to 10% of the total data set. How do I know? I just do this here, pd.info. So if I do this, oh sorry, not pd.info, df rather.info, you see that I have about 300 plus rows. And when you discover that missing values is not up to 10% or even 5% of the whole data set of the population, you are free to drop it. So the easiest thing we can do now, of course it's not always the rule, is to drop those missing values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the method. So I want to drop missing values, or to handle them. So what I'm going to do is I'll just simply say df dot, the method is drop na, then I'll define where what I want to drop, and the columns I want to consider, and then you discover that it's gone, and Once it's done running, I can just basically check the same thing again, and you discover that it's no longer there. You discover it's no longer there. So discover is no longer there. See, all zero, so which means that you don't have any missing values. So you can just say, okay, let me print my findings out. Discover that say let's say data frame shape. After dropping, you discover that it has reduced. Discover that it has reduced. Discover that it has dropping your missing values. You can just see. So df.shape, I missed something out. So discover that it has reduced to 300 because you discover that the highest we have here is 12 and there are about 312 rows, and we've been able to handle our missing values. So the next thing we want to go now is the first part of the analysis, which is demographic influence analysis. We'll just check. We're going to calculate the average. This matrix will calculate the average across the different demographic groups. And what are they? The gender, age, income, and the rest. So again, we'll specify the columns that we want to. We'll specify the columns that we want to. We'll specify the columns that we want to look at. Say demographic columns. Help me. Gender, age group, and the likes. Also do the same for score columns, which is the consumer perception of the influencers. So can just save this, and the next thing I'm going to do is that I will just iterate over the data frame, and then I will get the average over each of these columns that I specified. So I'll just say print. Alright, and just say print say average scores by column, and it's going to give me this. I have to put a new line character so that it appears in a new line. And then not just that, I want to print my group. I'm going to group it, df.group by each of these columns will be grouped by the demographic column. We're going to pick one demographic column, and then that's what we use. So score columns. I think that's it basically. Alright, so and then off we go. So you see now we have the average. For example, for female, you can see the score, average authenticity score for female, trustworthiness, the general influence, the purchase intention, which we said this is just the marketing strategy to see how we can increase the purchase intention. We see it for the gender, age group, income level, or education level. I'm going to come back to this later on. So but we have something. So the next thing we can do, of course, if you want to make some quick insights, take some quick insights, you can see that, for example, across the education level, there's the highest we have is the secondary school, which might lead you to want to say that, okay, it could be because they have the propensity to want to make use of social media the more, so definitely they should have the perception of influencers should be higher. That's an inference, by the way. It's an hypothesis. Thank you. So alright, so we also want to check the same thing across social media, several or various social media platforms. We want to see, is there, is this affected by, is this also affected across the various social media platforms? So I will just do the same thing. So we already saved this. I'll just say okay. I just want to save this here. So I'll go by social media. I think the name there is social media platform use. Yes, so it's helped me already. So we have it ready. So we see across several social media platforms, we can see our influencer metrics across. Of course, they are all close, pretty much close, but for example, under authenticity we have 3.02. okay, YouTube is having the highest and X, and okay, YouTube and X will make we'll take our conclusion later on. So another thing we want to check is want to see if these metrics have an association, if they are correlated. And in statistics, one way we can actually do that is by using correlation matrix, or you can use scatter plot. So since they are the columns we want to check are much, the best bet is the scatter matrix. So what I'm going to do is I will just pick, I'm going to subset my data frame. Subset basically means that I just want to take a chunk of it and I'll save it in another data frame called selected df. You want to see it, you can just always do dotted. Dotted, right? So you see that it's been, what we have now is a minimal version. You see it's easy to do your analysis with it. So now I want to calculate the correlation metrics. I need to calculate the correlation matrix. So, and how do I do that? It's quite simple. I'll just say selected df dots. I'll just call this method, and it would give me my correlation matrix. Correlation matrix. We save it because we might still make use of it later on. So to visualize it, we're also going to need to visualize it so that you can see your results. Visualize matrix, and to do that would use the plt.figure method. This specifies the size of our correlation matrix. The CMAP there stands for the color map. I can give it a title, so I can just say correlation matrix of probably influencers, or influencer matrix. So I can say influencer matrix. So, and then finally I can now see, to show it, I can just use this method. Right, there's a mistake, and we would not panic because it's normal. So I believe it should be solved by now. So we have our correlation matrix. The way to interpret it is 0 to 1 shows strong positive correlation, while 0 to -1 shows negative correlation, which means that negative is that as one quantity increases, the other decreases, and vice versa. While for positive, it means that as one quantity is increasing, the other is increasing. They demonstrate similar behavior, and the closer it is to 1 or -1, the higher the correlation is. So from here now we see that the metrics here that have higher correlation is this is YMP here, GI, and YIMP, which is the purchase intention, the marketing program to increase the purchase intention. So we can say that these two are strongly correlated, although relatively strongly correlated compared to other metrics, because none of these other metrics have as high values of in the correlation metrics. So we can say, okay, the GI and YMP, GI, which is general influence, and the YMP are positively correlated. So which means that there is a great chance that in this case, compared to other metrics, the higher the GI or the higher the YMP, means that the higher the influence of the influencer, the higher the purchase intention. The higher the general influence of the influencer, the higher the purchase intention. So which means if we should have influencers with high GI, it means that there's a great tendency it is going to drive purchase intention. It will drive or stimulate the consumers to purchase the products that is being marketed. So let's go on to visualizing our findings. So what we are just going to do is that we'll use bar charts to try to relay our findings. We're going to use bar charts to try to relay our findings. And how are we going to go about that? So we're going to iterate through our demographic columns, and we'll group it before we now think of. We'll group it and store in this variable before we think of plotting our charts. So the same df.group by call, and we have our score columns .mean .reset. Why do I have to use these brackets? Because they are methods. You need to call them to be able to use them. So and the next thing is that we will need to, there's what we call melting. Melting is almost like you're breaking it down, because if not, when we plot it, you won't like the way it's going to look like. So we're going to melt our data frame. And what do? We use the method, let me save it to method df. So what do? We use the method pd.melt. So we pass all the vital parameters. We are going to pass the name of our data frame, which is what's grouped data demographic. There's also a parameter id vars to specify it as a column, each column in the demographic column, and we'll pass the score columns to the score columns. So we're going to pass the score columns to it, and then we'll give it a name. We'll give it a name. So we can say and its average score, since we are computing the mean average score. So you can say metrics, metric type. So I can just run this, and then the next thing is I'll just plot my bar chart. So to avoid wasting, so plot our bar charts. So tlt.figure. So we're going to set the size, the title, the X label and Y label. Also, I don't bore you with much details, so just do that, and then so we should have our mistake somewhere. The naming. So let's check it now. Okay, we have to take care of this error.